So I will begin with a kind of a basic overview of this topic. So let's see how we can get the most out of Django's user model. So first, I kind of wanted to talk a bit about the user model in general. And so just to kind of lay things out, it's the core of Django's authentication system, and it represents the people who will be using your app. So out of the box, Django has provided us with many useful attributes for managing a standard user base. So at the very basic level, users can interact with your app in a lot of different ways, and Django has it mostly covered for you. But although Django provides some great things out of the box, there will always be situations when we want more for our app. So things like custom fields, custom permissions, custom model manager, or even an alternative identifier to username. So fortunately, these are all things that we can customize, but depending on what we want to customize, there are different ways of implementation. So let's start by having an overview of our options. Our first option is to create a proxy model, and this is done by extending the existing user model. So with this, we are just tacking on some extra stuff to Django's user model without actually changing anything in the database. This is simpler to implement, but only good if you need to customize a few things. Our second option is to create a new model that has a one-to-one relationship with Django's user model. So this will allow us to add additional attributes to the user model. And so even though you often want to do additional things, this is a good kind of standard approach. So a lot of times is exactly what we need to do. And our third option is to create our own custom user model. Doing it this way will be a little bit more complicated, but it will allow us more freedom with customization. So it's good if we want to use a different required field, such as email instead of username, when we want to add custom permissions for the user model, or if we wanted to add validators to our user model fields. So first, let's get a little overview on using the proxy model. By creating a proxy for the user model, we can have a copy of the user model that we can then add additional methods to. But because the proxy model doesn't actually create a new database table, we can't actually add anything to our proxy model that would require database migrations, which is why it's limited to just adding methods. On the other hand, it's really convenient that we can customize the user model without having to make database migrations. So let's take a brief look at how this would be implemented. So to set up a proxy model for a user model, the first thing that we do is create a new model that inherits the user model. Then all we do is add a meta class where we set proxy to true. So this tells Django that the author model is actually another name for the user model, and all authors will be treated as regular users. So you might be thinking, why would I want to do this? Well, from here, we can add additional functions to our proxy model. So in this example here, by adding a dunder string function, we can have the author model, which is actually the user model, display a person's name by default instead of their username. So this is kind of convenient if this appears a lot in your app and you want their name to show up instead of the username. And of course, you can add other methods here as well as model managers. So I'm going to take a quick pause right here. Are there any questions?
We had a couple and we answered them.
Oh, great. Okay. So I'm going to keep going.
But thanks for explaining that point, especially on the option number 1, the proxy model. The big idea is no table changes, right?
Right. Okay, so on to our option 2, which is to set up the one-to-one relationship. And this is actually my favorite way to customize the user model because it's basic, but it usually gets the job done. So this will do everything the proxy model did in addition to allowing us to add custom fields. So with this option, we're actually going to be creating a new table in the database to store our additional attributes. So it has a few more steps than the proxy model did. So let's take a look at an example here. So let's take a look at how we set up this. And also keep in mind that after this presentation, I'm actually going to do a full example of this. Okay, so for this, we start by creating a new model, which we will call profile. And when we create our new profile model, we will make user one of its attributes linked to the user model itself. This relationship means that every profile will be associated with one user, and every user will have one profile. With that set up, we can now add our additional attributes that we want on the user model. With this setup, we now have a model that will hold additional attributes for a user. Accessing these additional attributes is similar to accessing the user model's attributes. Instead of doing user.attribute, we do user.profile.attribute for these extras. For our profile model to work smoothly, we'll need to consider a few additional steps. When the user model is saved or updated, we'll also want to save our profile model since they are linked. Similarly, we'll also need to handle creation and deletion. When a user is deleted, we'll want to delete their profile object, and if a user is created, we'll want to have a profile object created for them. These are common situations, and Django has documentation on how this can be set up. And this differs greatly between whether you will be creating users solely with the Django admin versus creating users with your own forms. And there are also some additional steps that you can take to have the profile attributes show up in the Django admin. Okay, so I'm going to pause here again. Are there any questions?
We did wind up with one that came in just as I was speaking about the proxy model one.
Oh, okay.
If I'm using different proxy models for the user, can I check which one of the proxy models is for one of the users?
Let me go back to that slide. So just to make sure I understand the question correctly, so they're saying in addition to having author as a proxy model, they might have like another proxy model called something else, and they want to know which one is being used. Is that?
I guess so. Like if I've got a proxy model, if I'm using option number 1, I do some kind of query and I grab a hold of an entry, is there a way to trace back to know? I presume that it's just the instance of the class, right?
Right. Yeah. So our setup here, it only works if you're actually using the author object.
Got it. Right. Maybe they're asking, can you have different proxy models for different users? I don't think so. I think you install a proxy model for all users, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, I misunderstood the question. That's my fault. Sorry.
Okay, no, no problem. Okay, so now moving on to our third option. What if we want users to be able to log in with their email address instead of their username. That's where this comes in. So fortunately, Django has anticipated that we might want to customize the user model, and so they left us with a nice way to do this. We can inherit from Django's abstract-based user model to create our own custom user model so that we don't have to start totally from scratch. So this will provide basic user implementation and password handling and all those things that we don't necessarily want to have to set up ourselves. And we just have to fill in the missing parts. So here is our basic setup for our custom user model. All we need to do is inherit from the abstract-based user class, and we can start setting up our model's attributes. So the main important thing here is the username field attribute, which lets us specify what we want as the user model's unique identifier. So this will allow us to make email address the unique identifier for our custom user model and allow users to log in with email instead of usernames. We also need to let Django know that we overrode the user model in settings.py. And to do this, we only need to add a single attribute in settings.py, the auth user model attribute. So although the abstract-based user sets up a lot of nice things for us, it also leaves a few things to set up as well. Mostly these things include setting up a user manager in models.py, and this will allow you to define functions for how users and super users are created. We'll also need to set up a form to edit our custom user model in the Django admin. So fortunately, these things are spelled out clearly in the Django docs with fully implemented examples that can be customized. And after the presentation, of course, I'll show you as well that example. So just to recap a little bit what we've looked at so far. So the proxy model is great if you just want to add methods, but you don't want to have to change the database. The one-to-one relationship is good for adding fields, but does create a new table in the database. And the custom user model will replace the default user model for full customization, but you really should do it at the very beginning of your project. Okay, so right here you can find the repositories for the examples I'm about to demonstrate. And I'm going to leave this up and ask about questions.
Great. First, for everyone, I'm muting my microphone in between because the property next door is cutting down trees and grinding them, and it sounds like Armageddon around here. So I'm going to be careful with that. First question is from Scott, and he's asking about what you just mentioned. Can I start with option 1 and have users in the database and then migrate to option 2 without major issues, or is it critical to pick the option at the beginning? You explained that you should pick it at the beginning. Do you want to explain the pain involved?
Oh, right. So I think what he might be asking is switching from the proxy model to the one-to-one relationship. Is that right?
Yep.
So that isn't as big of a pain. The only kind of issues that could come up with that are you need to make sure that all of your existing users get that profile object. Because otherwise it will cause errors. And so, I don't know, in the past, I've just done something like create a batch script that gives everyone a profile to their user object.
Right.
So that's kind of the main thing.
Second is about the abstract-based user.
Mm-hmm.
And overriding. Can I override their properties? Can I override the methods?
Yeah, I think you can. Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. So yeah, you can kind of do your own thing with that as you see fit.
So not just add new ones, you can change the behavior of existing ones.
Right, and if you're feeling good about it, you don't even have to use that. You can just do your own thing.
Got it.
But I think it's kind of useful to start with the abstract base user.
All right, those are our questions.
Great. Okay, so now I will demonstrate a couple of the things I just talked about. So first off, we'll talk about the one-to-one user example. I'm not going to demonstrate the proxy because it's just a matter of adding a couple lines to your code. And you can also read up more about that on Django's user documentation. But first, I'm going to show you how to set up the one-to-one relationship for your user model. So you can find, I have this partially set up project. You can find this on the repos that I just shared on the slides. And we have some, I just kind of set up some basic stuff. I set up, I'll go through that briefly. I set up a view where you can go directly to a user's profile. I set up some templates to go with that. And then, I set up the URL for that as well. So that's kind of the extent of that. And the main thing that we'll need to consider for this option are the models and the admin, because we want our profile that we add to our user to show up in the Django admin as well. So let's get started with that. So just like we saw in the slides, we're going to start by importing Django's user model, because that's what we want to modify. Okay, so we have Django's user model imported. And of course, we also have imported models. And so now we can set up our one-to-one relationship, which we will call profile. And so our profile will have a user attribute, which will be a one-to-one relationship. That should be models with user. And we want to make sure that if a profile is deleted, or if a user is deleted, then their profile is also deleted. And that's what this bit here does. Okay, and it's really kind of as simple as that. So with this, we now have a profile object that is tied to a user. And at this point, I also want to mention, this is the very beginning of our project, so we don't even have our first migration done. Our database has not been created yet. So that kind of makes things simple. So from here, we can set up our additional attributes. So say we want to know their location. Could do that. And then we can do, let's see, let them type a bio. Okay, so this is, since we're going to be creating our users in the Django admin, this is all we need. So if we're going to be creating users, through other processes, sometimes it's useful to set up signals for automatically creating profiles and that sort of thing when a user is created. But to keep things simple, we're just going to use the Django admin. So speaking of the Django admin, we also want to make sure that our profile attributes, so the location and bio, will show up under a user when we look at that user in the admin. Before I jump to setting up the admin, I'll stop and ask, are there any questions?
Indeed, and there's one that I should have mentioned at the top in your defense. Poor Julia is presenting today on Windows because GoToWebinar doesn't support Linux for the presenters.
Oh, right, yeah.
And so she's probably got all of her keystrokes backwards and trying to figure out how to move around a little bit. So she's working at a disadvantage. The first question is one that lets you riff a little bit on some of the issues that might surround customizing. Rajiv asks, if I want to change the password every 3 months, how do I check the user's password, change password, shouldn't match with the last 3 passwords? Which model is good for this? You can talk about the model and maybe some of the corollary things that might go with it.
Okay, yeah, so for that, that's not something I've actually done before, but for that, I think you might want to look more into kind of the custom user model approach, because then you kind of have more freedom over the user model in general.
Right, and have something that whenever you, like a setter, so that every time you change a password, it records the previous passwords in a table or something, and maybe some kind of scheduler cron kind of thing to wake up each night and go look for people that are out of date, need to change their passwords and stuff.
Exactly.
Next question, I think you just covered it, but in the context of the 3 options, what about Django admin integration for each of the options? Which is easiest and most effective?
Oh, so I'd say, if I'm understanding the question correctly, if it's just a matter of having your customized stuff show up on the Django admin, I think the one-to-one option that we're implementing now is kind of the easiest to put into the Django admin, because with the custom user model, you kind of have to do some more lifting with creating your admin form, which we'll see here in a bit. But this one, as we'll see in a few minutes, it's pretty straightforward.
Next one, why do we use the one-to-one field for user? Can we use models.foreign key?
We could. I think I like to use the one-to-one field because it explicitly states, okay, we have one user for every profile, and we have one profile for every user, and it just kind of spells that out exactly. But I do encourage you to explore other options if you'd like to learn more about how it all works.
The eponymous and eternal question about UUIDs: is there a loss of performance for adding UUID field as a primary key to user model?
I haven't tried that. I suspect there could be, but I also think that could be a good idea to do something like that. Again, I encourage you to test it out yourself and
go read Reddit. You can spend 5 weeks reading everyone's strong Vim versus Emacs style opinion on UUID versus auto increment versus whatever. And then 2 people asked a question. I'll answer it out loud for everyone else. They asked, how is Julia showing the pop-up that shows the keyboard command for PyCharm? There's a plugin called Presentation Assistant for all of the JetBrains IDEs. You install that, and it tells you what to display. If you're a PyCharm person and you want PyCharm to yell at you when you don't use hotkeys, install Key Promoter X, and it will coach you on how to do things faster. Okay, that's all our questions. Back to you.
Cool. Yeah, I do really like the presentation assistant thing. That's really neat. Okay, so now let's move on to how we can add our profile attributes to our admin. So here we have our admin.py file. So let's start with our imports. So first, we want to import the Django user admin that they provide us out of the box. So let's see, that would be the user admin, and we're going to import that as base user admin. So then we also need to import the user model itself. And then we will import the model that we just created, our profile model that we just created right here. We're going to import that as well. So the first thing that we're going to do is we want this profile model to show up on the same page as our user model. So that's referred to as inline. So we're going to create an inline admin class that we're going to add to our user model admin form. So to do that, we will create a new class. And this is one of Django's cool features. And then we're going to specify our model, which is profile. And this is just to help us clean up things if we need to clean up things. Okay, so we have that. So next we need to tell Django's user admin to use this inline. So we're actually going to override the user admin a bit. Okay. And we're going to specify the inlines. This is just a list. You provided a list. And we're going to give it the profile inline that we just created. I'll conform to PEP8 since PyCharm is telling me I should do that. So next, in order for this to actually take hold, we need to unregister the old user admin and register ours instead. So to do that, do admin.site.unregister, and we're going to unregister the user model. And then we're going to register ours instead. So admin.site.register user, and then we're going to give it our user admin that we just created that has the inline that we created here. So that's all you need for allowing our profile to be inline on our Django admin. So let's now, I'll stop and ask, are there any questions?
We have one. What would be a better approach for adding a foreign key to a user model, abstract user or abstract base user?
Okay, let me make sure I'm understanding the question. Abstract user versus abstract base user, and this is when we're referring to the custom user. So let's see. I usually use abstract base user, but yeah, I think it's really. I think this is a situation where definitely go through the Django docs and see what information it provides you there. Yeah, that's all I have to say there. I'm not sure I quite fully understand the question. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm not sure I do either. I'll reply back and ask for a little bit more.
Okay.
Feedback. We did get another question in during that one. Why are you doing import blah blah as base user admin? Do you just like renaming your imports?
Yeah, it's just I just kind of, for readability, I just kind of
Yeah.
like renaming it. But you don't have to do that.
All right, onward.
Cool. Okay, so now let's take a look at what we just did. So since this project is totally new, we first need to create the database. So to do that, I am going to make sure I'm in the, dang it, I'm used to Linux. Gonna go to the directory that has the managed.py, and then I'm going to do python manage.py make migrations. And so this will not only collect our new model that we created, the profile model, but it will also, oh no, what did I do? Oh, I had a typo. Make sure you don't have typos. Okay, I should have noticed that it was telling me that that wasn't correct. Okay, yeah, so we're going to make migrations, and so this will set up not just our profile model that we created, but also all of the Django basics, like the user model and all that kind of stuff. So once we make migrations, we're going to migrate them. And this will create our SQLite database. I'm just using, out of the box, Django has a SQLite database set up for you. So just using that. And so now that all of our tables are set up, I'm going to create a super user so that we can go into the Django admin. So to do that, you can use the create super user. Yeah, okay. And then you can just follow the prompt here. Okay, so our super user was created. Now we're ready to spin up our app. So I'm going to do manage.py run server. Okay, and now I'm going to open up my browser here. Hold on one sec. Okay, so I started up our app, and it's I went to by default it just brings you to localhost 8000, and I just went to /admin, and it brought me to our login page where I will log in with the super user I just created. And this, for those of you who are not as familiar with Django, this is just the basic default Django admin. And if you go to users, you can see our super user. And the exciting thing is if you scroll down, you can see the profile information that we added. So we can type in our location and a bio and save. And now that information is attached to our user. So that's really cool. So I'm going to pause here and ask, are there any questions?
All right, there's one about decorators. The unregistered and registered procedures could be done with our register decorator. It's more of a common question.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of decorators, or you like doing it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I do. I'm trying to keep it simple for this, but yeah, I definitely make things easier for yourself and use a decorator if that's what you like to do. But yeah.
And one point, just as a way to get the red squiggles to go away, go to the nested, right-click on extended user app, the nested one in the folder.
Oh, yeah.
The next one down, that one, and mark it as sources root. Mark directory as near the bottom. Sources root.
Great. Okay. Okay, so that is the extending the user model with the one-to-one relationship. So next, I'm going to move on to showing you how to create a custom user model. And while I do that, I will
wait. Sorry, can you go back? I told you the wrong one.
Sure.
I misread it. Go up one level and mark that one as sources root. And then the the nested one, unmark it.
That's fantastic. I actually did not know about that feature, so thank you. Okay. So for the custom user, I set up a very similar project. Again, we'll mostly be looking at models and the admin. You'll notice that those are blank. And I set up, for this one, I just set up a view that just lists all the users on the homepage. But again, we're going to be mostly looking at the Django admin anyway. But if you want to play around with this later, feel free to. Okay. So onward. So first, like we did before, let's create our model. So first, we're going to do our imports again. So for this, we're going to import our abstract base user. And we're also going to import a base user manager. And I'll show that's what's going to help us specify how we're going to create our users. So we'll start with our custom user. We're just going to call it my user. And we're going to inherit from abstract base user. And from here, we're going to set up our fields. So first, going to set up email. And because we're going to make this our uniquely identifiable field, we're going to set unique to true. So then from here, we can add, all kinds of other things. Yeah, here, why not? Let's see. Okay. So, for the sake of simplicity, we're just going to leave at those two. And so we also need to create a user manager to specify how users are created. So let's set that up as well. Oh, but first, let's specify our username field. So if you remember, this is the field that will uniquely identify our users. And so in this case, we're going to use email. And it actually should be like this. Okay. So now let's set up our user manager. So that will inherit from base user manager. And the first thing we need to do is tell it how it's going to create our user. And we're going to make sure, Okay. And then, we're going to make sure that an email is specified. And then if that's all good, then we're going to create a user. And let's see. Oh, we'll do that now. Other fields could be added there as well. And then we need to set the password. And this is just a Django function that will, do the hashing and all that kind of stuff for you. And then we will save. And then we'll have it return the user. And then we do a similar thing for really essentially the same thing for creating a super user. So I'm just gonna copy this because it's the same process, except I'll show you the one difference. So the one difference here is we need to set this user to the value is admin to true. So that's that way they're a super user. And then back to that's our user manager. Tells us how to create users and super users. And then there's some other things that that we can provide for our custom user model as well, just to make things simple. And actually, kind of for the sake of time, I copied this from the Django user model docs. I encourage you to read those through, but I'm just going to paste them here so you don't have to watch me type them. So we can see if a user has a certain permission, if they're staff, things like that. And one more thing that we should add is the dunder string. And we want that to return the email address. Oh, and I also forgot, we put this is admin here. I actually need to add that here as well. Okay. So that is that. And this is a very, very basic implementation. And so next we need to set up the admin. So, by default, the base Django user model, they already set that up for you. But in this situation, we're going to have to set it up ourselves. So I'm just going to stop and check for a moment. How much time do I have left?
We are getting down to the last 5 or 10 minutes. We have a few questions. So go ahead and wrap up this part and let's take some questions and then wrap up whatever else you have.
Okay, so I hate to do this to you all, but I'm going to copy and paste the example from the Django documentation for the admin. If you, I feel bad. I encourage you to all look at that, but I'm unfortunately running out of time. but I'll paste it here and I'll walk through it very briefly. So the first thing we need to do is import our user, and then also before I forget, we also need to set. Let's see here in our settings. Just let it know that we overrode the user model there. So we have to create a form for creating a user in the Django admin. And so that, password 1, password 2, make sure that they match, make sure that we're saving it to the my user model, clean the password, and then save it. And then if we want to change the user, it's kind of similar. This is updating, and then this is actually adding our user and our form to the admin itself. So we're creating a form, adding the form, adding the fields from our customized model to the list of fields on the admin. You don't have to include them all, but you can choose here which ones you want to include. And then we want to register that similar to how we did before. And then if you run it and open up the admin, you'll see your custom user model. And I'll update my repos to have a actually working project so you can see for yourself. So I will stop now and ask, are there any questions?
All right, we have a few.
Okay.
How can we add a profile image for a user?
Oh, like an actual image file?
Right.
Mm-hmm. So
presumably something where in the admin you can go and get an upload widget and all that stuff.
Yeah. So I think there's actually, depending on how you want to store the images depends on how you want to do that. Like where I used to work, it was way cheaper for us to get a database than for us to get a file storage. So we kind of saved our pictures to the database as blobs. I don't recommend that, but if you're in a sticky situation like I was, that was the solution there. But you save that as an attribute, and then I think Django has some form classes actually that allow you to upload images and files and that sort of thing. So you would just use that for the Django admin.
All right. Let's see. Next one, and this might be going back a little bit in time,
Sure.
about 10 or 15 minutes ago. Should we override the save method to use normalize under email also?
Yeah, you could do that. Yeah.
All right. This is about user groups, custom user groups. How to create custom user groups in a custom user model.
Okay, that's a good question. So I'm pretty sure that the group model can be customized very similarly, in that I think there's an abstract class that you can inherit from. So I think you can set that up very similarly to how you would set up your custom user. And I'm pretty sure the Django documentation, I know I keep saying this, but the Django documentation is some of the best documentation I've ever seen.
Right.
It has some good resources for that. And again, just make sure you try to do this at the beginning of your project, preferably before you ever do any migrations. That would, to make things go as smoothly as possible.
To second your point about the Django documentation, we had someone named Scott who asked a question and then 3 minutes later posted something. So, I found it. It's here in the docs, and put the link to the Django docs.
Awesome. Yeah.
Okay, when is it worth it to use abstract base user and not abstract user, which has almost all the boilerplate you had to write in abstract base user on your end?
Well, I think it just kind of depends on how much you want to customize it. If you want to customize it more, use one. If you just kind of want to change, you just want to change this, say, then you could just go with the more simplistic approach.
Yeah, and that's a thing that people learn over time. There's part of it's taste, and people like to have complete control and not trust the magic of the framework. But when
Yeah.
you do that, when you choose to take the magic on yourself, you better be a magician.
Yeah, exactly.
And when Django makes a release, you might break because they fixed their magic and you didn't. And you might have to write
Right.
tests, and you sign yourself up for a whole bunch of janitorial work when you take control, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But there's the other side of like, oh, you have all the freedom you want. So
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Last question that we have right now. Are there things that you would like to do to your user model to prepare them for REST APIs?
oh, well, that's a good question. Yeah, so I mean, I think that depends on how you want to use users in your REST API. Like, if you just need custom attributes, then go ahead and just use the one-to-one relationship. That should be just fine. If you want to do, something a little crazier, like, um, someone mentioned the UID and all that kind of stuff, then you could just go forward with creating your custom user. Or yeah, really, I think it's kind of similar to how you would do a web app. Really, I think,
Yeah.
depending on what you want to customize.
That's all we have for questions right now. Do you have any more code that you want to go over?
No, I mean that's pretty much what I wanted to show. And again, I'll provide this. I'll update my repos to have working code, so you can all kind of play with it and see what I did.
You willing to take questions over in the repo if people have a question about certain code? They can just use the GitHub issue tracker to do it.
They can. I I have a feeling my answer to most things might be look at the Django documentation, because that was kind of my reference for all these basic examples. And yeah, but if I can help, I'll help as much as I can.
And I guess the better thing is to tell people go to DjangoCon and they can come up and say thank you in person and ask you questions
Yeah,
and jibber jabber about all things Django.
I do highly recommend DjangoCon. It's a great conference.
All right. You going to any other conferences before then? You going to PyCon or anything?
No, I couldn't make it to PyCon. I might go to JupyterCon, since I'm into the
Oh,
Jupyter stuff now.
all
But
right.
yeah, it is. Yeah, thanks so much for having me here.
All right.
I hope
Really
everyone.
appreciate it. And these kind of topics about a deep dive on a particular part of Django or something like that are really useful for our audience. So I really appreciate you taking time to talk with us.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun.
All right, we'll switch back over to my screen. If any of you have any questions after we're wrapping up right now, we don't have any in the queue right now, but feel free to ask us questions. You can ask us by email, social media, Twitter. My colleague Ernst and I are several times a day checking Twitter. You can also wait for the recording to go up on the blog post and do a comment on our blog or a comment on the YouTube video itself. If you'd like more information on PyCharm in general, please go to our website at jetbrains.com/PyCharm. We would love your feedback on this. You'll get an email afterwards that says, please take a survey. Please take the survey. Let us know. We actually read it and we modify how we do things based on your feedback. And the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel soon and our blog. The blog also has other information, up-to-date information about PyCharm, news about releases and events. In addition to our educational resources. So this recording, for example, will be published there in a few days. And we'll also provide some additional links and information, such as the GitHub repo for this on the blog. That's all we have for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, Julia, and hope you all have a nice day.